Hello, boys and girls. In today's video, I'm going to explain to you how units work and how to counter other units with your units, okay? And I'm just going to tell you a generalized form of it, and it's not going to be always true because certain aspects exist that we can't control. For example, research, skin set bonuses, sometimes firing accuracy, it's like RNG also has a big play in that. As a general rule of thumb, however, I have here like a page from Wikipedia, and I'm going to explain to you how units work and how to counter them. So, an anti tank gun, as the name suggests, is good against tanks. The more the armor you have, the more damage it's going to do. So, it's really good against super heavy tanks and MBTs. It doesn't do a lot to a light tank because a light tank has no armor at all. Okay? And it does get countered by a light tank, it gets countered by a howitzer, it gets countered by an infantry, by a rocket launcher, and by a tank hunter on field. So a general rule on like the field is, for example, if you're fighting a howitzer, or you're fighting anti-tank gun, or you're fighting artillery with tanks, okay, on like a 1v1 in a controlled environment with the same buffs and research, a tank is mostly going to win. But it also depends on what type. So, for example, if an anti-tank gun was to fight a super heavy, an anti-tank gun would most likely win. For example, if a howitzer was going to fight, let's say, like an infantry, a howitzer would win. So, I'm going to explain to you how units work and how you should be using them. An anti-tank gun, best against fighter planes. So, if a good anti-tank gun on an AA mode can do a lot to a fighter, or even if you're getting bombed. And it does a lot to super heavy tanks and MBTs, or medium or heavy tanks if you are in like the lower leagues. A howitzer is overall, I think, the most best unit to have because although it doesn't do a lot to, let's say, super heavy tanks most of the time, uh, it does do a lot to everything else. So an infantry is going to shred, an anti-tank gun is going to kill. A light tank actually does counter like a howitzer, but a good howitzer does a lot of damage to every unit, especially if you hit like a skill off. And the howitzers in the base are really good because they counter virtually everything apart from SH. But for example, a good howitzer, two or three good howitzers will shred an SH, okay, regardless of if you have an anti tank gun or tank hunter inside your garrison, okay? So howitzers usually should be played with when you're at your base. So I wouldn't like to send these out. I would just like to play with my base. Let's say I want to target that, I'm gonna pull it in, he comes right here, I just pull my RT back. I'm just gonna play around like that. So moving on, infantry is a really good counter against anti-tank guns, light tanks, super heavy tanks, and tank hunters because it has a lot of damage resist, and it has a lot of, like, it can withstand a lot of pen. It's, however, not good against rocket launchers, howitzers, and in some rare cases, an MBT can actually beat an infantry because of the fortification damage it has. So, for example, if I saw an infantry die by like Spader's MB, I would not be surprised, okay? And infantry is best if you're trying to, let's say, kill a base that has a lot of pen. So, for example, if you look at this base has a lot of howitzers, okay? It doesn't. It has only one heli, so I would like to use an SH on here. So, for example, let's say if you had like a heli right here and an ATG, and just one howitzer, I would like to use an SH on that base. Okay, and infantry is all right in terms of PvP, but I've mostly just had to use this for sponging because that's the one thing it's really good at. And rocket launchers are arguably the most stupid unit to have, in my opinion, of course. You're free to critique me in the comments and tell me that I'm dumb, but I personally don't like them. They are good against howitzers and anti-tank guns and infantry if you can get a shot off and then run away. Because the initial shot is 2 seconds, and after that, I think it's seven, unless you can use it properly. So, rocket launcher, you would use, like, you would target it, hit a shot off, bring it here, and target it again. But in an offline setting where you can't do that, when it's in your base, it doesn't do a lot. Let's say if you get sponged by an infantry, yeah, it's going to shred it. But I would much rather have a howitzer inside than a rocket launcher. And rocket launchers are all right if you're Vale. For example, if you make an infantry and like a rocket launcher, put EOP lady on that, give it like skill damage. It's good for, taking bases. For example, if you're like a 450, 500 million player and you're trying to kill 250 million bases, of course you can. But you also need good protection for this rocket launcher because these rocket launchers get shredded by bombers. So if a Marty's bomber is going to target that, a good Marty's bomber is going to take a good rocket launcher and about one or two bombs, three at max. So you need to keep watch of your rockets. And moving on, light tanks get countered by an infantry. They get countered by MBTs, so medium tanks and heavy tanks. But light tanks actually counter howitzers, anti-tank guns, rocket launchers, and tank hunters because they don't have a lot of let's say armor. So anti-tank gun and a tank hunter or like a helicopter can't do a lot to it. And they're good on field. they're a really good unit to use right now, and I would recommend using them as a rat. Just go hit and run and just come back. Moving on, an MBT is really good for sponging and fighting. It actually got buffed a lot in the recent update, so I would use it. But an MBT usually gets countered by a tank hunter and usually gets countered by an ATG. An MB, however, on the field is good against a howitzer or a rocket launcher or light tanks. Okay, a super heavy is a good sponging unit, I would say, but it is actually kind of weak against tank hunters and a good heli, and also against howitzers. If, for example, if you have three howitzers, I'm just gonna show you our guy. So ignore the tags, by the way. This guy, okay, so if you look at this base, you would see three howitzers and one sponge and one heli, and you would say, yeah, an SH is good for that. Yeah, it is, but those howitzers, when they hit that skill damage, they're going to shred you absolutely. Okay, so that's what you need to take into consideration. Also, tank hunters, they used to be really broken when they first came out, and not like tank hunters. I mean, like the heli when it first came out, but now they are, I think they're much more balanced, I would say. They do get actually really countered by a light tank and infantry, especially. Anti-tank guns do a lot to helis too sometimes. And the heli just counters a super heavy tank and an MB tank. All right. And a disclaimer, all of this is in a controlled environment where the parts, the skin sets, the what do you say, VIP bonuses, the research is all the same. If you have a good light tank, okay, it's going to kill a good MB, regardless of the fact that an MB actually counters a light tank. Or, for example, your howitzer is gonna counter a super heavy tank, or your tank hunter could, let's say, counter, a light tank because a light tank is a counter to a heli actually. So all of this basically depends on your research, on your play style, on how you play, and it does depend on your skills. But right now, I'm just telling you like the base stuff of what counters what and what to use. Okay, so for example, if this is a heli right now and I had an MB out, I wouldn't target that because that is my counter. If I had a heli, I would probably go for it. If I had a light tank, I would definitely go for it because I do counter that. But in some rare cases, my MB can actually beat that, or vice versa. It just depends. It's RNG, it's skin set bonuses. It's like a whole lot more. If you have good research, if you have good skin sets, if you have good officers, if you have good officer passives, if you have if you know how to play, you can win against a counter. I'm not saying this is just set in stone. I'm just telling you what the base is. What the basics are. And moving on to fighters, we have three types of fighters. So Vanguard, Liberty, and Mortis. So let's start with the Vanguard fighter. A lot of people believe that Vanguard fighters are like the strongest, and when you fight them and they come into combat, they actually take 3 or 4 units of yours, and you're like, holy shit, that's a strong fighter. But actually, no. Vanguard fighters have a lot of intercept. So what that means is basically when they come into combat, they do a lot of damage to you. Okay, And likewise, a Marty's fighter has a lot of maneuverability and like a dodge rate. So when a Marty's fighters comes into combat, it doesn't do a lot. But the more it stays into combat, the more it does. And Liberty fighter is actually balanced all over, and it's good for both fighting or sponging or whatever you want to do. It's like a balanced in between of the three fighters. Okay. So for example, if I had a Vanguard fighter, okay, I would like to go into combat. I would like to fight that. Give it 3 4 seconds, pull it back. Okay, give it 3 4 seconds, pull it back, and then I would go out of combat and then go in again because I have a lot of intercept. Okay, and if I had likewise, if I had a Marty's fighter, I would like to stay in combat as long as I can because the longer I stay into combat, the longer I dodge, the more damage I'm gonna actually do. And Liberty is just complete dogfight, just go directly in. And fighters also depend on raw damage, so there's not a lot of like skill damage. Fighters are just raw damage. So if you have like a 40 million fighter and is fighting, let's say, two fighters that are like 25 million, there is a huge chance that that 40 million fighter will lose because it all depends on raw damage. It all depends on white damage. It all depends on this damage. Okay. So yeah, so this is a good indicator. Like, look, I did more skill damage on like the artillery than I did raw damage. So artillery does a lot of skill damage. Light tanks do a lot of white damage. Helis do a balanced. MBs are like the same. As such, you don't really use for combat. Infantry don't use for combat. ATG also do a lot of skill damage, but they also do a lot of white damage, so it's balanced for them. You need to know. You need to basically know what unit to use against something that's coming to attack you. And even in terms of base defense, right now you can look at my lineup. I can just sustain 3 units at once. I can't sustain more than that. I don't have the facilities. So what I have right now is one thing for penning. So for example, if an SH or an MB comes to my base, it's gonna get shredded by that. Or if an infantry comes, two of my howitzers are gonna try to counter it. So even in terms of base defense, in terms of fighting, you need to know what to have. You need to know what to do. You need to know what units can kill yours. You need to know what your units can kill. And moving on to bombers, I don't have a lot of experience with bombers, but Liberty does the most damage to bases. Marty's and Vanguard do the most damage to single units, and Liberty can also be used on army groups. They do really well, and but you need to have the correct officers for them. So, for example, if you're trying to, let's say, kill a base, the best combo on like a Liberty fighter would probably be Inferno and Lone Star. So this guy and this guy, they're gonna do the most, but that doesn't mean that they're gonna do the most to a unit. So you need to figure it out. So I do hope you understand all of this, and if you have any questions or if you disagree with me or if you do want to teach me, please comment down below and tell me what you think about this video. And thank you for tuning in. Have a nice day.